The glasses are off. That's how you know we're getting serious today. This video is going to be a little bit more of a ranty video where I just talk about things. If you aren't interested in watching this type of video, I don't blame you. Feel free to click off of it. I promise I'll be uploading a tutorial next. But I did want to talk about something in the game industry and just kind of spout off my opinion for a few minutes. Let me know what you guys think in the comments afterwards, because I know this is probably a controversial topic and I am interested in hearing your guys' opinions. All right, so I'm just going to say it. I hate the mindset that games need to have some sort of unique mechanic or hook to be successful in today's market. I first started thinking about this a couple months ago when Jonathan Blow made some statement in an interview, and he said something along the lines like, games today aren't innovating. There's nothing interesting about indie games today. Regardless of whether or not you think that Jonathan Blow is accurate in his statement, is kind of beside the point. That's not really the point of this video. He could be right, he could be wrong, it doesn't matter. I only bring that up is because that's kind of what first started this kind of train of thought for me a few months back, and I've been kind of sitting on it for a little bit. But the thing I really want to hit on in this video is that I don't think that games need a mechanical hook to be successful. Right now, the market is two things. Number one, it's very different than it was 10 years ago, and it's much larger. The market is so much larger. So when we look at the largeness aspect of it, right, this is the easy one to really kind of address. The market is growing. There's so much more demand for games. There's more people playing. Therefore, it doesn't matter if your game is mechanically interesting, as long as it has some sort of interesting aspect to it. Somebody out there is going to like it, and chances are there's going to be a large enough niche that if it's well executed on, it will be successful. So I think that's the easy one to cover, and I'm not going to spend too much time on it. I think higher demand means increased supply, and we're just seeing that increased supply in different unique ways. And this brings me to the other point that I want to point out, is that the market is different. No longer do we care so much about interesting mechanics. We care a lot about aesthetic and mood and feel and tone and all of these, the vibes, right? Like, what's the vibe of the game? And I think that this is kind of what the hook has become for modern indie games. There's so many games you can look at where it's not necessarily the most interesting mechanic, but they evoke such a response from the player. There's such a strong mood that's being generated that you have no choice but to just kind of react and say, oh my God, that's interesting. One of my favorite examples of this, and there's a couple big game dev figureheads that have talked about, like, anytime any sort of pixelated top-down action RPG is being created, they always come out of the woodworks and say, oh, what's interesting about this game? Why would I not just go play Hyper Light Drifter? All right, two things to this statement. Number one, Hyper Light Drifter is only, 3 years old now, maybe? There's a reason why we now look at Hyper Light Drifter as the golden standard for these top-down action RPGs. And that's because the execution of it was so flawless that we had no choice but to love it and to be engaged with it. And I think that's the main point of this video, is that execution is always greater than ideas. You can have the most generic ideas, but if you execute on it flawlessly, and not even flawlessly, if you execute it on it well, then your idea, your product is going to succeed. Really generic ideas that have been recycled over and over and over again keep coming up and keep becoming very popular, and that's because they're executed on well. And this is kind of going back to my other point of where aesthetic and mood and vibe is really important. The reason Hyper Light Drifter grabbed everyone's attention was not because it had an interesting mechanic. It didn't. I mean, it has a few mechanics in there, but nothing mind-blowing that hasn't been somewhat seen before. The reason it grabbed everyone's attention was because of the aesthetic, the mood, the music, the color palette, the grittiness, the dark themes, the giant freaking monster skeleton things. Those were the aspects of it that grabbed people's attention. Nobody looked at that trailer and says, I wonder what the interesting mechanic is of movement. Why don't I just go play Legend of Zelda NES, because that's the most, it's such a close-minded observation of what games are today that it blows my mind that people still think like this. Games have evolved, and I think people's mindset of games should evolve with it. It's why VR is so popular right now, is because VR is introducing an experience. They aren't mechanically really excited. I mean, there are a few, but generally, it's all about the experience. As soon as you put on a VR headset, it really doesn't matter what you do, it's immediately interesting. And that's because people are really excited about experiences right now and not about new mechanics. We've been developing games in AAA industries and in indie dev studios for 30 years now, 40 years. How long have games been coming out? Long enough that a lot of the mechanics have kind of been used at some point. Now, obviously, there are always new ones and interesting ones, but that's not to say the only way to succeed in today's market is to create some revolutionary new mechanic. So I don't know if I have really anything else to say about it at this point. I just wanted to kind of make a video where I just address this point because I see it brought up over and over and over again. I'll use an example to kind of summarize my point. Heartbeast, the famous, YouTuber, game maker, guru to mentor, and he made a video explaining why he was stopping the development of Grain. And his response, he said, and don't quote me on this, but something along the lines of, I don't want to make Grain because it doesn't introduce anything new that Hyperlight Drifter didn't already do. And people could just go play Hyperlight Drifter instead of playing my game, Grain. And this is Heartbeast saying this. And when I first heard this, I totally agreed with it. You know what Grain had that Hyperlight Drifter didn't? It had a totally new environment. It had a totally new world. It could have potentially had a totally different combat system. It had a new art style. It could have had different and interesting new music. It had a different person developing it. So inherently, it's going to be different. And even if at the end of the day, Hyperlight Drifter and Grain, or insert any game here, are mechanically identical, there are only so many times that you can go back and play Hyperlight Drifter. So that being said, if you create a Hyperlight Drifter clone or, successor or spiritual sequel, people who are fans of Hyperlight Drifter are going to go play your game. It's why games like Pokemon, Call of Duty, Madden, these games that just reiterate the same idea over and over and over again are still successful, is because people want new of the old. They want things that they like, things that they're comfortable with, things that they have fun with and they know that they will enjoy, but they want a new iteration of it. They want a new version of it. So what is wrong with being the next generation of Hyperlight Drifter? What's wrong with being 2019's, 2020's Hyperlight Drifter? What's wrong with being just the new version of something that was great? If at the end of the day, someone says, this is identical to X great game, good. That's a good thing. I'll take that as a positive. I'll take that as a win, and I'll say thank you, and I'll be proud of it. Not every game has to be mechanically interesting, because that is not what the market right now is interested. And even if that were the case, the market is so large that there's room for experiences, and people right now want experiences, and those who want mechanically interesting things can go find it, because again, the market is so large for it. So to say that that's the only thing you need to be successful is so incredibly ignorant. I don't know how else to say it. I think, how I'm going to sound like an asshole no matter how I say it. And that's why I preface this video with saying that it's going to be just a rant about this topic. Anyway, that's all I have to say. Hopefully this video wasn't too similar to all the other hundreds of thousands of videos on YouTube, because if that's the case, I shouldn't even make videos anymore. Why do I make YouTube videos if there's already other people making YouTube videos? Why make Game Maker videos if there's already other people making Game Maker videos? Why make ranting Game Maker videos if there's already other people making ranting Game Maker videos? Oh, it's because people like it and people want more of it. So if you like it and you want more of it, like this video, leave a comment, tell me which game you think is great, and tell me which game is so similar to it but you also love in the comments below, so that we can stir the Twitter drama pot a little bit hotter. Thanks so much, guys, and I'll see you in the next tutorial.